We've had the return of the Premier League now. It's time for the return of the Champions League. And the games come thick and fast for Arsenal, who, of course, last year were in the Europa League. It's a step up, playing in the Champions League, obviously. They lost their last game against Lens. They take on Sevilla in this one. To take a sort of step back from the game itself for a second, how do you think Arteta feels about, first of all, dealing with all of these games, high-level games, difficult games, and also the fact that he must truly believe that they were this close to winning the Premier League last year, are contenders for it. Man City haven't looked their usual selves, and I get it's the first half of the season, but what would you say is the priority for Arteta? And actually, maybe a more specific question when it comes to lineups. If you're Arteta and you've got to rotate, and when you rotate, you sort of prioritise one game over another, I would suggest. When it comes down to it, which game is he going to prioritise? Whatever the Premier League game is, or whatever the Champions League game is, Kweku?
He's going to prioritise the Premier League. I think that's the goal for Arsenal. It's a different competition, but do you remember last season when Arsenal played against Man City in the FA Cup? I think it was at the Etihad, and Man City didn't rotate, but Arsenal heavily rotated, and I think that told you what Arteta thought of the Premier League. I think that's what they want. They haven't won the Premier League for 20 years. Obviously, it'll be the 20-year anniversary of the Invincibles if they win it this season, and I think that's what they've got the eye on. What I would say, though, personally, is the Champions League might be easier to win. If you look at the teams in Europe in terms of dominant teams, I think Real Madrid are a year away from being that Real Madrid team that go and dominate Europe. Man City are obviously in the Premier League and the Champions League, and you look beyond that, and I just don't really see a clear contender. So despite the fact that I think that Arsenal's priority will be the Premier League, I think if they pay attention to the Champions League, they could go on a deep run in the competition.
Do you think Arteta should? I think I get the idea with the FA Cup, but obviously FA Cup and Champions League is a different beast, right?
Of course.
But it's not, whereas that would be a 70% change.
Yeah.
When it comes to the Champions League, it's 10-15% in terms of those rotations. Do you think that Arteta has to rotate and has to kind of pick a competition with this, or do you think he can just go the whole hog with both? Because I think one thing he has said, and some people have sort of critiqued him for it, is his stance on the amount of games that important players should play. Bukayo Saka, of course, missed that last game, and we've all seen the memes on social media where Saka's he's got bandages here and there, and he's still getting wheeled out by Arteta, who has said that the best players in the world play every 3 days. I've seen it. He's talking about Messi, he's talking about Salah, he's talking about those players that go and do it again and again. Is that a bit of a bluff, or do you think he will just kind of run this team into the ground? And is that a dangerous thing?
I think they've got enough quality in their squad now and enough depth that probably they don't make wholesale changes for competitions anymore like they did in the FA Cup last season. I think they've probably got a core 7 or 8 that will start most games, but then I think they can afford to make 3-4 changes a game. I think they've got enough quality within their ranks to be able to do that now, and I actually think there's a bit of jeopardy in this game as well, because they've lost to Lens, which I didn't particularly see coming. Lens have not been in the Champions League for a very, very long time. Have they been in it at all?
I think that's what caught them out.
Yeah, I think they got caught cold.
Supposedly fantastic.
They got caught cold in that game. Suddenly now they're coming up against European specialists in Sevilla, and that's what they are. If they lose, suddenly you're looking at, oh God, we could end up finishing third here and getting knocked down into the Europa League, and they won't want that. So I think he'll have to go strong for this game. But to answer your original point, I think part of Arteta's squad building has been with going a long way in both competitions in terms of a title race and the Champions League in mind, because they've just got an array of options. They've lost Timber, and yet you haven't really noticed that he's not there because their squad's still so vast.
But have they got enough in those two key areas? I think we would all say the same too. It's Martinelli and Saka on both sides. Would he ever be willing, if they're fit and available, even if they're slightly jaded, fatigued, whatever, would he ever drop those two? Because those two are both essentially coming back from injury, and you're just going to play them back to back to back? Feels a bit dangerous, doesn't it?
It is very dangerous, and you saw it before the international break. Arsenal played against Bournemouth on either a Saturday or Sunday. Saka started that game very surprised because he was coming to that game with an injury, came off injured, and then he started the game against Lens midweek and went off injured. I understand what Arteta's saying in terms of the best players play all the games, but you've got a strong enough team that if you're going away to Lens in the Champions League, Bukayo Saka shouldn't have to start that game.
But have they? This is my thing. I think an overall squad, yes, from an attacking point of view, I think that, and I think you saw it in that game against Lens, Saka went off, And Arsenal showed very little going forwards. And even the game against Man City, they cancelled each other out, which we said was going to happen on this show.
Yeah.
And the goal was a moment of managerial brilliance, in my opinion, in terms of the substitutions and utilising Tomiyasu higher up the pitch. That's not going to work time and again.
Yeah.
So you're then going to play Gabriel Jesus as your right winger, or will it be Reece Nelson or whoever it may be? Are they good enough to keep winning games again and again?
Good enough to get out of the group. And I think we saw it with Arsenal last year or last season. They went in January and got a Trossard. I think they'll go again in January and probably target someone like a Pedro Neto to reinforce that right-hand side, because that's been an issue for Arsenal for a long, long time. The fact that Bukayo Saka, it seems like he has to play every single minute of every single game for Arsenal to get a positive result. That shouldn't be a case for a team that should be challenging for the Premier League, who I think are going to win the Premier League, and a team that are going to be challenging in the Champions League as well. And so I think Arsenal got enough in terms of squad depth to get out of this Champions League group, but I do expect Arsenal to go again in the January transfer window to bring in a right winger to make sure that Saka doesn't have to play that many minutes.
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say they could do with a kind of a multifunctional winger that could play both sides and cover off both sides. I suppose Trossard can do that to an extent, but this is away from the game. I actually think long term, and I've been thinking this for a long time, I think Martinelli is going to end up as a central striker. I think he's lethal in front of goal. If Arsenal can't get this forward in, that, you know, everyone's saying they're going to go in January for a central striker, a number 9, if they could get a top level left-sided player in, I actually think Martinelli could really do well up front. We saw Mane move from being a wide player to a central striker for half a season for Liverpool, and he was really effective. I just think long term, that's where Martinelli is gonna end up. I think he's the best finisher at Arsenal, and I could see him playing a central role at some point.
I do think, though, teams are so effective. If you can have your wide players being your goal getters, I think that makes you so dangerous, because not only do they score goals, they make the opposition's fullback think about going the other way. Compare Arsenal to the Liverpool team in 1920 all the time. Salah, Mane were the goal getters. Firmino was the man in the middle. He wasn't expected to score goals, but could score goals, and he brought the best out of those two players. If you can create a system like that at Arsenal, where Saka and Martinelli are the goal getters, and you have a centre forward who can create, I think you're in a stronger position than moving Martinelli to a central position where you kind of lose a lot of what makes Martinelli, which is running in behind and attacking fullbacks.
The only concern for me is when you have both of those, if one of them's off, then it falls down a touch.
Yeah, because it's not the same type of player to come in, is there?
Sevilla are struggling in La Liga. I mean, I say struggling, they're about 3 points off 7th, 8th in the league, or maybe a couple of points more than that. But they're quite a direct side. Diego Alonso is the manager, playing a 4-4-2. You've got En-Nesyri up top, who obviously was brilliant for them in the Europa League last year. It played in that final. It should not go to penalties, so Acuna cannot take a penalty to win it, which is important as well. That direct style, is that something to keep in mind here as well, where if Sevilla are going to play in that direct style, you need to pick the right personnel for that, and it's one where you should be able to control the game a little bit better. A direct team playing against Arsenal, is that something that will suit Arsenal, do you think?
I think they'll be all right with that now. I think when the team's a bit more direct, it used to be something of Arsenal a week. They're not a team with the mentality to deal with that. I think they absolutely are now. I think the two centre-backs, it's probably one of the best pairings in the world, Gabriel and Saliba. I think that's a really nice central defensive partnership. But I do think there's a potential banana skin this game, because I think there's a little bit of pressure on Arsenal because they've lost their last game. As I mentioned before, Sevilla are European specialists. This is what they do. It doesn't matter what they're doing in La Liga when it's a European night. They come alive. Yeah. So I do think this is a tricky game. I expect Arsenal to come through it, but I do think there's a bit of jeopardy, like I said before.
This is a must-win. You don't want to get awkward into the last 2-3 games of the season, because also that would then allow you to rotate, which is everything we're talking about. So I think Arsenal win. I think they'll win comfortably, and I think they'll win 2-0.
You've taken my prediction.
Pinched it.
Yeah, you pinched it. I'm going for 2-0 Arsenal win as well. I think they'll score an early goal and control the game.
2-1 to Arsenal.
Okay.